Hello class, welcome back. So now we're going to talk about the components of culture. Um, so the very first thing we're talking about is subcultures, and we are on page 51 by now of chapter 2. And so subcultures are groups of people who basically occupy some smaller component of the culture that we live in, of our dominant culture. So a good example of this would be the punk rock culture, or the roller derby girls are a good example of subcultures. School systems, like your college, is a subculture. So any culture or smaller group um, that develops kind of a specialized way to communicate with itself. So we think often of cultures as other societies, but we have many, many subcultures in our own society. Sometimes it deals with your race or ethnicity, but oftentimes it centers around something else, like a sports event or activity, or some type of interest that you might have. All of those are subcultures, and you can even have subcultures within your subculture. For example, in the punk rock cultures, there's what is called the straight edge punks, and they wear these X's on their hands, and they're part of the punk culture. They listen to the music and they dress like punks, but they don't do drugs or drink alcohol or smoke cigarettes or anything like that. And so they're a subcomponent, a subculture of that particular culture. A counterculture, on the other hand, moving on a little bit in the book, is any culture that basically its core values are in contrast to the dominant culture's core values. So you can be at the same time a subculture and a counterculture, or you can just be a subculture that happens to fall relatively in line with the dominant culture, right? So the bigger culture, the one that has the power. Pluralistic societies are essentially what we have. It's a society that's made up of many different types of groups, and that's very common in the United States today. So we have different ethnic groups, different groups of interest, different groups of class. We have all different types of groups. You know, you think about the car culture, the music culture, the sporting event cultures, and so we have a variety of different groups within our society. For these subcultures, countercultures, and other groups, they tend to, for the most part, the individuals within them tend to adopt most of the core values of the society. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. We'll kind of list them. But they may have basically their own norms, values, and mores for their own culture. So another way to talk about norms, values, and mores are what we call folkways, mores, and taboos. So folkways are essentially the same thing as a norm. They're not strictly enforced. Like we were talking about standing in line, you might get a negative sanction or you may not get told anything if you cut in line in front of people. A more is a part of the culture core value where we require more conformity than we do in terms of norms. So people might let you get away with talking to them and standing too close to them while you speak to them. But people probably would not let you get away with physically assaulting them very often. So that's more of a more as opposed to a folkway. A taboo is kind of breaking those core values, those deeply ingrained values, and you can be exiled for this type of behavior. So things like murder or child rape would be considered a taboo in our society. And we remove those people from the population and we exile them, right, in terms of imprisonment. So some of the American culture values, I just want to give you a few examples. American values are things like achievement and success, individualism, hard work, efficiency and practicality, material comfort, freedom, equality. um, group superiority, education, religiosity, romantic love, leisure, self-fulfillment, youthfulness, thinness, right? All of these are American values and they're part of our dominant culture. What's religiosity is what you might be asking. It's a sociological way of measuring religion. So you can't really measure somebody's spiritualness or religiousness. So it's a term for how we actually measure it. It's the concrete representation of spirituality or religiousness. It's things like how often a person goes to church and how active they are in their church and how spiritual they say they are, how committed they say they are to their religion. That's religiosity. So you learned a new word. It's helpful. And we tend to have what we call value clusters. So a value cluster is a group of things that tend to work together. Achievement and success, right? Achievement, success, and hard work. Efficiency, practicality, and hard work, right? Hard work, achievement, success, and material comfort. These are value clusters. A value contradiction is a little bit different. So we go back and we think, in our society, we value thinness. We don't value health. We value thinness because you can be healthy fat and we still condemn you for that. We want people to be thin, right? So in our culture, we like to promote eating. Say, for example, you're watching a sports event. What do you have at the sports event? All kinds of food that are not going to promote thinness. Pizza and wings and 7-layer dip and chips and all this stuff that tastes good, right? So at the same time that we're saying eat, 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 we say stay skinny, 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 right? Make sure that you are, get enough leisure time, but work really hard, right? Believe in romantic love, but obey your parents and, and commit to your marriage, right? So we have kind of these, so that one might be pushing it, right? So we don't always think that romantic love, we'd like to think that romantic love and marriage are connected, but sometimes romantic love and marriage are not connected. But in our society, we say both. You should leave if you're not in love in a marriage anymore, and you should stay committed to a person who you've married and you made that commitment to. So that's a value contradiction that we have in our society. Another one that I'd like to say is you'll hear somebody, make comments about like drink like a man, but don't be an alcoholic, right? So those are value contradictions. And one of the things that also pops up when we talk about these values are the difference between ideal and real culture. So going back again, right, we value freedom, but we create a lot of laws. I think I have that one here. We value freedom, but we create laws. If we were to value freedom to the extent that everybody had the freedom to do whatever they want, this would be called anarchy. And this doesn't really work in our real society and our real culture. So we have our ideal values, equality, but yet we have severe inequality in our society. Right? We value commitment. That's the ideal romantic love with commitment. But the truth is, they don't always go hand in hand. Self-fulfillment versus hard work, right? So it's hard to work hard all the time and have self-fulfillment unless you really love the job that you do. So ideal versus real culture, there can be very much a difference between the two. And oftentimes there's what we call a cultural lag. So we still say we value hard work, but then we idealize people who have obtained success without hard work. So the example I like to use is Paris Hilton, who inherited money, and she was very much publicized for a long time for being wealthy and fitting the standards of beauty and thinness. A good example today of that would be some of the Kardashians. For the most part, their wealth is not obtained through the same type of hard work that other Americans do. if we really truly valued and glorified hard work, we would really be focused on people who dig ditches for a living or pick up trash for a living or mow lawns for a living, that type of intensive hard labor. But in reality, it's the wealth ethic that we have instead of the work ethic. And that's kind of a cultural lag. So that's kind of falling behind. This ideal is still hanging on, but it's not exactly the representation in society we see today. Now, these should be fairly familiar: ethnocentrism and cultural relativism. Can you tell me which one is which? What's the difference between ethnocentrism and cultural relativism? Next video up, I'm going to explain how to do assignment 3, Blackboard.